Well, Gold Derby fans, I am sitting here with two very talented writers who are behind some of the most beloved movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And this year they capped off the Infinity Saga in a huge way. These are the writers of Avengers Endgame, Christopher Markus and Stephen McFeely. I'm Sam Eckmann from Gold Derby. Thank you both so much for joining me here. This film is really, really massive. In one word. So with, 11 years of movies behind it, there's 21 previous movies. How do you go about actually starting? Because I just kept thinking this has no business being as satisfying, as emotionally rich as it is, because there's so many characters, over 50 characters in here. So when you guys are looking at creating a script, how do you first start and decide where is your focus going to land? Where are those emotional points in the movie?
Sure.
Well, you've hit it. It's the emotional part. It's part logistics, but it's more importantly, it's character.
And we knew we had two movies, which was an interesting opportunity, not make one movie that we chopped in half, but to really try and make two freestanding movies that were different in tone and different in speed. And it all came down to the snap. We knew Thanos. We knew his basic goal is to eliminate 50% of the living things in the universe. And that if we really wanted to take that seriously, it couldn't just be a threat. It had to happen. And it had to happen at the end of the first movie so that we could spend a good amount of time in Endgame taking that seriously, so it wasn't a false threat. I mean, that's where the 5 years later comes in. That is because we wanted to put our heroes under maximum stress so we could see what their characters would do. How do humans react to that big of a loss?
Mm-hmm. I'm curious because you just brought up the sort of two-part nature of it, and this was originally when they first announced it was going to be Infinity War Part 2. So what was at what point along the way did you decide actually it's this different thing, and how did you want to set out about making those two different films feel different from each other, even though it's kind of one gigantic story there?
I mean, I think Kevin early on, when he had some sort of event where he announced the slate for the next few years, and yes, he called it Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2, but as we started working on it, I mean, we're talking in the outlining sort of blue sky period, we realized that that's not doing us any favors to call it that, because these definitely need to be two different things. Chris just said it, like logistically, we knew the snap was going to allow us sort of a first part and a second part. The reason it's helpful, the reason we used it that way, was because the goal of the movies, of the second movie, was to say goodbye to the original 6 Avengers. But if we were going to say goodbye to those people in different and satisfying ways, we felt obligated to spend a lot of time with them and to challenge them and push them forward. If we're going to say goodbye to somebody, we better make sure that there's nothing left on the table for them, which is why the 5 years is so important, and so that we can change, so that these people can grow or regress in some ways. Clint Barton clearly becomes a homicidal maniac, but Tony, accepts the loss and he moves on, and he has a family and whatnot. Like, when you decide you're going to say goodbye to Tony Stark, we want to get him to a place where you are sad by that, but it's sort of a melancholy, because you realize he's lived a full life and he's become the best version of himself.
Yeah. Melancholy is a word I think that permeates through a lot of this film. It's very somber in places, and I think PTSD really from the snap is something that it affects everyone, and it's really interesting to see such an epic story treat that with such weight. Was that always a core element of the story going in, was seeing them really deal with this trauma?
Very much so. It was the goal to necessarily write ourselves into a corner with the snap, because we really wanted it to happen, and then to not fix it in any easy way. which necessitated the characters living with loss in a way that a lot of movie characters don't usually live, and certainly superheroes don't usually have loss in their films on this level, because they are entirely defined by fighting to win. And when they lose and there's nothing to fight, what the hell do they do? Do they even mean anything? And these are fascinating questions to tackle, especially when you're in the 20-second movie of a ongoing story. To take your foot off the gas a little bit on a action plot level, and be able to take stock of what these characters have been through over the course of those movies and the damage it's done to them and the resolve it's left them with, and to be able to have a rather neat set of 5-6 characters to view the various different reactions to grief and loss. It was a pretty unique thing to find within the structure of this giant sci-fi movie.
Yeah. And I want to go back too, because we lose several beloved Avengers in this movie, especially the very notable scene with Tony Stark. And we've seen, comic book fans, we know that characters come back to life all the time, and we see time travel and we see different versions of the characters. So what was your process? How did you treat that moment when we're going to lose Tony, to make that seem different, to make that stick and resonate with the audience?
Well, you put it at the end for openers. You know what? Robert was really helpful in that, just on a how to get through the scene level. Like Chris and I, certainly in our first drafts, felt obligated to write a lot of, we're taking out such an important, iconic character.
I mean, especially when he's surrounded by so many people that he has history with.
Sure.
You feel a first blush obligation for everybody to take a deli number and wait in line to have their own moment.
You in the back. How did I?
Come on. I got a little bit of life left. Come here.
It became very clear in talking to Robert, like he wanted to say very little, and what that meant was he was denying, Tony Stark is denying you, the audience, the thing that you need, that you crave. I want to hear one last thing from the guy who stopped talking. Oh, he really has stopped talking. Oh, this is it. This is the end. This is unlike him in any other movie prior to this. Oh, and I have to accept this now. And there he is. And now the elegiac music comes up, and now we're into an elongated funeral scene.
Yeah.
And the satisfaction of upending that in a way to allow Tony to speak again by giving his own eulogy was, boy, it was in character, but it was also so satisfying in a way that was both relieving of grief, but even sadder that, this man recorded his own eulogy because he knew very well that he might die, and he did. And he agreed.
And I think I saw something from Comic-Con, I believe, where you were discussing ideas that you had thrown around for the movie, and we could have even had more death. And I think you were talking about how Thanos would go back in time and kill the Avengers in a previous timeline, and then that would start the battle of the Avengers in the present. So it could have been even darker than what we got. How hard is it to sort of scrap ideas like that when they come in? I imagine with this many characters, you had a whole slew of things that had to be cut, even though it is a 3-hour film.
It becomes about clarity and cleanliness after a while, because we had nothing was off the table for us. This is a rare opportunity as writers. Like anything you think up, any random thing you want to pull from a comic, you can do, because Kevin and Marvel and Disney were ambitious enough to try it. So when we come up with ideas like, time travel wobbly stuff where Thanos kills all the Avengers and throws Captain America's head at his own feet, like, that's interesting, but if the audience, or the reader in this case, can't really be with you on every minute of that page, then it goes, because you need to get clean.
Yeah. So a lot of the time, cutting things can be a relief. Yeah. Because you're generally cutting it because you've come to a greater realization of the story that you're telling. And as you realize that this scene isn't really on story, now it can go. Because it is shocking sometimes how long into the process it takes to really, truly agree on what the story is. I mean, I don't mean the plot, but like really the story you're trying to tell. But once you do lock onto that, it becomes very clear what needs to go.
Decisions get easy that way because you have a guiding light.
So does that mean we should rule out I know we had the re-release, but is there any like kind of hope or desire to do a kind of extended edition with other stuff you cut? Or it sounds like
as it was. You're making extended.
I don't know that there's that much on the cutting room floor that you'd be excited to see.
No.
There were things that were, there's not like whole plot lines that you didn't get. There might be a scene or two. Or there's a scene on a spaceship with Clint and Natasha that's very sweet, but it would only slow the movie down. I mean, the released cut of this movie is really what it should be. Right. So there isn't some secret cut that we'd all prefer. When they released the extra footage, I was very glad that it was tacked on to the end because the rhythm is so good now in the final cut that to load extra things in as Easter eggs seems to, deny the nature of it.
Right. And I wanted to ask you a little bit too about sort of fan reaction, because we live in this culture of everyone wants to sort of analyze the trailers and predict what's happening next. And do you feel pressure to sort of give into those or play into those? Like there's tons of fans who said, I saw Adam Warlock's Cocoon in Guardians of the Galaxy, so he must be the key to defeating Thanos. Does that affect you, or do you have to sort of isolate yourself from that sort of thing?
Listen, if people are talking about your movie, that's good. We don't particularly listen to that. We know, eventually we know where we're going, and we make the movie, particularly Chris, myself, Joe, and Anthony, make the movie we want to see, and we just hope to God that that's what everyone else wants to see or is satisfied by that.
I mean, seeing people's reactions is exciting, not only because, certainly in this case they're happy and they're revved up, but it's also it's like somebody opening curtains in a room that you've been stuck in a dark room. We worked on these for, I don't know, 4-ish years before a trailer came out. So you have no external reaction to the work that you're doing. So it seems good to you, and we all kind of agree this must be working, but you don't know what the hell's going on outside in the world, and to have it finally just a little bit of an escape into the light is it's so much fun.
Yeah. And if I can go back before and earlier in your career, because it feels like the two of you as a team have done a lot of adapting. Adapting comic stories. You went into the world of Narnia, but you first really got your big break, your name on the map here with The Life and Death of Peter Sellers, which you won an Emmy for, and which was adapted from a book as well.
Sure.
Do you feel like that process there in any way prepared you for these epic stories you'd go on to tell?
Sellers and Narnia certainly were exercises in this sort of horrible word that everyone uses now, IP, right? The idea that that maybe Chris and I are suited to taking this thing that people value for other reasons and making sure that it has that there's a story to be told that honors that. Sometimes in my darkest moments, I go, how come we haven't written more original stories? And in large part, it's because adapting these other stories has allowed us to put plenty of ourselves in the movies.
Yeah.
I've never felt, particularly at Marvel, ever hampered by any of the things I'm inheriting. And as we go on, we inherit less and less, so that they don't look much like, as if you know the comics, they don't look much like the comics as you get further along.
I sometimes think of adaptation as kind of like song covers. where there are some people who, they cover a song, it sounds exactly like the last time you heard it. And there are other people who can completely reimagine the thing. And it's not an original song, but that thing you just heard is nothing like the last time you heard it. Mm-hmm. So it's all a matter of whose hands it's in. Frank Sinatra didn't write any songs, but there's a hell of a lot of Frank Sinatra's emotions in the performance. So it is sometimes it makes me think about that. As far as Sellers, it's interesting in that because that touches on so many of his iconic roles from the past, it does have a little bit of that Endgame feel of we're dipping into other movies and learning a little something that we need to know and coming forward. I hadn't thought about it.
No, part of the delight of Endgame is, I hadn't thought about this either. Thank you for asking me. There's a recognition that audiences have, or a delight that they have when they recognize things from other places. It's part of why the MCU is so successful, is because, when this person's face shows up, they can whisper to the person next to them, that's the guy from the other thing, and he has to, wait, this is going to get interesting. And so Sellers, that was the same thing. If he shows up in a hat with a parrot on his shoulder, if you're in the know, you know what movie he's in and where he is in his life. I didn't thought about that.
Yeah, well, you've talked about a lot of things in Marvel movies, which maybe lead into my next question. But Martin Scorsese obviously has brought up this whole thing: Marvel movies aren't cinema, right? And I have a point. I'm not trying to start a war here, but there's a part of his quote that I found really interesting and made me think like, oh, I feel like I watched a different movie from you, which is he said, "It isn't the cinema of human beings trying to convey emotional, psychological experiences to another human being." But I mean, we've sat here and talked about PTSD. I think of the goodbye that Tony has to Pepper, and the amazing scene Rene Russo has with Thor. Thank you so much for bringing Frigga back. I was so sad she died. More Rene Russo is always great. But I'm curious, when you get sort of the story idea for a Marvel movie like Endgame or any of the Captain America movies, I feel like there's lots of human elements in there. So what are the possibilities that you see when you get that story, when you sit down to write one of these Marvel films?
I mean, it's our primary focus throughout the whole process, is what is happening internally to the humans inside the supersuits. I mean, we've never written a Captain America movie. We've written 3 Steve Rogers movies and 2 more. It is about when someone comes to you, this person being Kevin Feige, and says, we want to make 2 Thanos movies. And you start to learn about what that means and about the destruction of the universe and all this stuff. We don't start thinking, gosh, I wonder how a soul stone works. We start thinking about Thanos is a man. He's an adopted father with 2 daughters. What would happen if one of the daughters, maybe one of the stones, was? What's happening psychologically to this man who we would traditionally view as a villain, but now we are forced to see as a father who does indeed love his daughter, and a daughter who's abused but has some sort of love for her father. Yes, it's dressed in fantastic clothing, but it is a family story, and it is a painful one. And if we can't find something like that in each plot that we're telling, we will rethink the plot in order to find it. Because that's the only reason we're doing this.
Yeah, Infinity War comes down to the end of the second act, where Thanos has to sacrifice Gamora to get what he wants. And, the end of Act 2 was always the worst thing that can happen to your characters. And Gamora dies there, but it's not the worst thing that could happen to the Avengers, even though it's sad. It's the worst thing that could happen to Thanos, because he has to give up the only person in the universe that he loves to continue his quest. We aim at those moments from the very beginning, and that's why we write them.
Well, it worked very well. Obviously, this film has been an enormous, deserving success for the both of you. Thank you both for sitting down with me. Everyone watching at home, make sure to subscribe to Gold Derby. And I'm Sam Eckmann. Thank you, Christopher, Stephen, for joining me here today.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, everyone.